must admit that when I saw that, like, the S word
Mm.
was kind of in the cards for us to talk about today in this kind of continuing conversation of cultivating authenticity, I really didn't want to do it. Isn't that interesting though? I mean, I think I think for me, because it's like really telling, right? I mean, that it really kind of, I mean, a lot of the topics that we have kind of hit home for me personally, but I think this one does. I mean, this is for
Yeah.
me has been the biggest journey of kind of unraveling, kind of bringing shame out of the shadows or out of the not looking at.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and man has shame. It's powerful when we don't talk about it. It is powerful when we don't look at it because it really can just take over everything. At
Yeah.
least it had. I mean, I've had that experience in my life.
You talked before about like personifying shame, and it's like
Mhm.
its desire is for you to
Mhm.
feel more shameful about the thing,
Yeah.
so that it doesn't, like, the most amount of shame about it would be like if you can't quite possibly say that thing out loud. That would be the worst thing ever. And so you should feel more and more shameful about it so that you don't say it out loud. Like that's its whole MO, right? In teachings like this, like Science of Mind, like New Thought, that there is this we're on this path of self-awareness, and so much of that is about bringing unconscious beliefs into a conscious awareness. And so feelings of unworthiness and fear and lack and all those kind of things, we bring those to the surface and look at them, and I realized that I think it's totally possible to do that around all of these beliefs. Like, and yes, we need to keep doing it, but to do that, go through that process on all these beliefs without doing that to the beliefs that we have shame around, which might be the most powerful beliefs. So
Yeah.
here we are, like, looking at, let's just say, the worthiness conversation, feeling unworthy, feeling less than, feeling not whole, and we're doing all this work around it, around, like, I don't know what, like the 20% of belief that we have, like this percentage of belief that holds like 20% of the power. Whereas like the shame, there, you follow that down a little further, and it's so sneaky, right? It's
Oh,
so sneaky. Like,
yeah.
that belief will eventually bring you to this thing. Like, I think a lot of people probably don't necessarily recognize shame as shame because we're so repressive of it.
Yeah.
It's just such a power. Like, it's so sneaky. It can just remain so unconscious.
It's subversive. It
Yeah.
really is.
And
And,
so we can do like the worthiness, lack, fear thing and never touch
yeah,
shame.
because it just kind of gets rooted. And I was thinking about in the larger conversation of authenticity, and I'm like, for me, and I think maybe this can translate. I'm thinking just in general for everyone, but I think that the biggest roadblock to authenticity is shame. It is because like
Yeah.
it's that thing of, oh, I can't show myself because, and it's the because that is the shame part, right? And it's
Yeah.
and so the activity of it becomes not being ourselves. So the
Yeah.
activity of shame, or like how it out pictures, is that we have to be someone else, or some contrived sort of version of ourselves that somehow is like extricated from this sort of feeling of shame, right? And so then the shame is like down here, and now we're like, oh no, this is who we are, right? We're not gonna look at that part. Um, yeah, so I think for me, I mean, I think it is the biggest roadblock. And I think when we begin to look at those triggers and how we're triggered and how we know we're triggered, and I think that's different for everybody. Like for me, I can feel it. Oh, I can feel like this, like, like this kind of just flush in my face of, um, of like the shame, or like, oh, I shouldn't, you know, oh, don't, I let too much of myself come out. And now someone's going to think, it's that sort of
Yeah.
feeling. So when I can look at those times, kind of like, when you have people sometimes keep a journal of like their emotions or their feelings or like the foods they've eaten and how they feel after the food. It's almost like like this journal
Yeah.
in my mind sometimes, and I think that's kind of a beneficial, like, practical way to do it. Like if we're
Yeah.
really wanting to dig into this sort of shame thing, like recognize when those triggers come up and like, okay, what was happening? What was the situation? What was the
Yeah.
experience? And like, oh, oh, and then you begin to kind of like rewind the tape, and that
Yeah.
tape was in was put in the cassette player like years ago often, you know.
What's a cassette player?
Who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Uh,
I've heard of them.
yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Only ever heard. No.
but man, shame is the only way to dispel it is to bring it
Well,
out.
yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing too about it. Like maybe about the whole self journey thing, inner journey thing. And I feel like we've talked about this recently in a way where it seems like, and I don't know that anyone ever says this, but it seems as if the goal somehow is to like remove like totally get rid of the unconscious belief.
Yeah,
And that sounds like a really admirable, like, oh yeah, that would be great. Like, oh man, if I could just get rid of all these limiting beliefs and like, oh, it'd be unstoppable.
yeah,
But I don't know that it really works that way, especially because those beliefs get tied into like memories, like core events in our lives.
yeah,
We can't go in, as far as I know, we can't go and like remove an event. Like that event still happened. It was a formative part of our life. For that event to be that important still today, that was that had such impact on who we are.
right.
And so I don't think it's to like excavate out the whole thing.
Yeah,
But like you said before about shame, like even just bringing it to the surface, like just talking about it, talking about the idea of shame, I think is powerful enough. Like just even bringing our awareness to shame, bringing the awareness that we have something we're shameful of, a part of us that we're ashamed of. And certainly, yeah, I mean, we can actually like have conversations in safe circles where we're like talking about the shame, the thing that we are ashamed
right,
of. But I
right.
think even just acknowledging shame, like we've talked about, like acknowledging the fear of fear,
Yeah,
acknowledging that there is a cultural fear of fear is a powerful conversation. Acknowledging that we all have shame about something, I think, is a really powerful conversation, because then it's like, oh, we can get curious and start looking at like, oh, what do I have shame about?
yeah,
Do I have shame? Oh, I do. Oh, what about? Oh, interesting. And it's not like, because I think trying to remove it makes it wrong. I think
yeah.
it's part of human nature to have shame,
Oh, yeah,
and I
yeah,
think it's there to like encourage us to do a different thing. I'm right. It was a protective mechanism, and now it's like, okay, let's move past that or through that shame into something else, but not to. I don't think we're trying to make the unconscious beliefs, the undesirable beliefs, the shame. I don't think we're trying to make it all wrong. Although from this side, when we have shame, I think from this side of it's like, oh, and it's definitely wrong. That's not me. And no one can possibly know that I have that thought or I have that behavior. And so I'm just gonna put it in this box and lock it up and put it away. And then it becomes like more shameful.
yeah.
Because now we're like, we'll have a box of locked up beliefs, and like no one can know. But even just talking about it, like, oh, right, everyone has it. Okay.
Well, it's almost like, I agree with you. Not It's not like we're ridding ourselves of all this sort of thing, but it is saying, "Hey, I see you." And
Yeah.
hey, my response was from the from the jumping off point of shame. And so now I've responded that way. Oh, well, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
gives a lot of clarity to sometimes how we kind of operate and interact. And so when I can say, oh, I was reacting from the space of shame and unworthiness. Well, that's interesting information. Now I wonder, like, how could if I look at that, like, I know the truth. I know the truth is this, this, and this. So what would it look like if I start responding from that space? And then just becomes um, gathering information, right? And I think gathering more clarity and seeing things for what they are. It's almost like when you're afraid of something, and or maybe you're anxious about something or worrying about something, and then you maybe verbally or externally process that with someone else and can have a conversation. Then it's like, oh, now that I talk about it, it doesn't feel as powerful. It doesn't have as much as sharp a teeth, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that shame is the same way, right? The more we talk about it, or those areas or um of our lives of like, hey, just calling what it is. Like, hey, I'm feeling this way. I'm not feeling super confident in this area because I feel whatever way. I don't feel worthy, or I feel like I'm an imposter, right? Who am I to be talking about? I feel like an imposter, And so when we can look at that and say, oh, well, that sounds silly, right? Then we can begin to like disseminate or kind of like dissolve some of the sharpness of shame. Now, there's lots of just traumatic life experiences that just reinforce that, I think. And I think just being aware of that, being gentle with ourselves, being gentle with each other, right? Especially in the context of community, whatever that looks like for you. Just being aware that we all have those things, and we all may be operating at any given time from that space. And so I think it does call us to be a little more empathetic, a little more gentle, a little more aware.
It's really funny that it brought to mind a story I haven't thought about in years. My past career as a freelance musician, there was a time where I got to play with this choir. So I was an instrumentalist in the orchestra for a choir, and the choir director had set the precedent for the choir that if we're running through a piece and you make a mistake, just raise your hand just for a moment, then put it down. As a choir director, she was, ultimately she's tasked with getting this group of 200 people to sing this one piece together and in tune and correctly. And so there's all these different parts happening at the same time. It's a lot easier to address a mistake if you know you made it. Or maybe you don't have to address the mistake because you know you made it. If
Right.
you don't know you made it, then as a choir director or as a conductor, I have to figure out, okay, out of the 200 of you,
Who did
where
it?
did that come from? And so what happened was it just set the stage where it removed the that belief that like, oh, I have to be perfect all the time. Like professional musicians don't make mistakes. Like, no, they do. They just know how to recover from it or do it in a way where no one else notices or whatever. And so in this rehearsal setting, it was like, it's so much easier and so much more time efficient. If you know you made a mistake, just raise your hand. Yep.
They create that space. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so there
Oh,
was this shameless
yeah.
experience, and you'd see every once in a while I would be running through a thing and hand would go up here and over here, whatever. And then the choir director knows, like, oh, you made a mistake.
Yeah.
So cool.
That's so beautiful that kind of translates to, like, community, right?
Yeah. To be able to
Like,
just raise your hand, but like, sorry, that was
"Oh,
my bad.
wow, that was,"
I
or,
didn't mean to
"Hey,
do
I
it that
need some
way.
help on this. This is like an area," or like, "Hey, this is an area that is a trigger for me," or, "This is an area of, I have a little bit of, like, shame in this area.
Yeah.
I may need some support in this area." Like, what a beautiful visual for, like, the power of
Yeah.
community. I mean, and it's not like I always feel like we're having to convince, but obviously we're not having to convince people. I mean, we know that the power that happens, and
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's especially important in cultivating authenticity, cultivating this like, hey, to show up our authentic, to show up in our raised hand. I made a mistake, like you're
Yeah.
saying, and
Yeah.
I think
Imagine people
that.
just walking around just like, "Oh, sorry. No,
Mm,
oh, no."
ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember, like, even in basketball, like, if you committed the foul, like, when I played in college, they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that was me." It was just
Sure.
acknowledgement,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"Yes,
Yeah.
I acknowledge that that was not something that I want to continue to do,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Truth Be Told, where we've talked about cultivating authenticity. Like, this whole month is about cultivating authenticity. This conversation, even though it's been the topic for this month, we will continue this conversation because we know that cultivating authenticity like permeates everything. If you would like to explore this conversation a little bit further, you can join us on Thursdays for the gathering. It's our small group opportunity to kind of share of our own experiences, share how maybe shame shows up in our lives, and begin to learn from one another and support one another through this process and through this journey of showing up more authentically to life, which I think feels good. And it's the goal, I think, for a lot of us to show up more authentically and to explore what that would actually look like, not only in the individual level, but the community level. Hop on over to our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. You'll see all of the events and things that are coming up. And if we do not see you at any of those events or Thursday, we will see you back here next week at Truth Be Told.